Hello, I'm Diane Beckstead, founder of Musicals for Change and composer of Tailspin, the musical. It's a snowy day here in western Pennsylvania, but maybe like you, I'm thinking about spring. And if you're considering producing our show, Tailspin, I have some tips and tricks and suggestions for you to make the performance the best that it can be. Our nonprofit partner is Therapy Dogs United, which is an organization that trains and provides therapy pets to hospitals, nursing homes, to children who've experienced some kind of trauma. And it's a very worthy organization. And I hope that while you produce this show with your kids, that you will help them learn something about therapy pets and the way they benefit us. This tutorial will cover some ideas for set design, production notes, costumes, and puppetry. The director's guide that is included with the musical when you purchase it has more detailed instructions, but if you would just like an overview and are trying to determine whether or not you would like to produce this show, then this tutorial will definitely help you. These are just suggestions. Teachers, directors, or creative people, I'm sure that you'll come up with some wonderful ways to do things that are unique to your production. And if you have some great ideas and you'd like to share them with us, things that worked well for you, please email us at musicalsforchange@gmail.com. We'd love to hear how you managed to create your own successful production. The most critical decision in producing Tailspin is whether to use puppets or not use puppets. It could be done both ways. Personally, we suggest that yes, you should use puppets, no matter whether you feel that you have some experience with puppetry or not. When you use puppets, the kids are invested in their characters, and the puppets themselves are just a really sweet, creative way to perform this show that your audiences will appreciate as well as the kids. The puppeteers in this show are visible to the audience. They are on stage with their puppets, and they are as much a character as the puppets themselves. So in this show, the puppets don't actually talk or sing. After all, those 7 puppet characters are animals, and so they only make animal sounds when any sound is necessary at all. But in certain scenes, the puppeteers put their puppets down out of view of the audience, and they become that character themselves. For example, Pumpkin is a stray cat who calls himself Killer, and he is an orange cat, mangy looking cat. The puppeteer does not look like a cat other than having a cat tail, but the puppeteer will have an orange t-shirt, a leather or denim jacket, ripped jeans, so that it's clear that the puppeteer and the puppet are one and the same character. The audience will not have any problem making this leap because in some scenes, for instance, scenes that are outside the cages, they're in the animal shelter room, the animals are behind cages, the puppets are held, and the humans in the scene understand that those puppets are the animals. But in scenes where only the animals are on stage, there are no humans present, then the puppets are not used, and the puppeteers become the animal characters. Because they are costumed similarly to the puppets that they're carrying, the audience can make that visual leap to understand that those are both one and the same character. The only character of the 7 animals that does not resemble their puppeteer is Buster. Buster is the dog that comes in to the very first scene with the narrator, Jesse. And so Buster is a separate character from Jesse. But otherwise, each one of these characters is portrayed by a puppeteer that looks like their puppet. So I mentioned Pumpkin. Pumpkin is a primary character and is a stray, a little rough looking. The only animal characteristic that Pumpkin has is a cat tail, and that's an important part of the story. Max is a golden retriever or some sort of long-haired dog, cream colored, and the character, the puppet, would be in the same colors. Max is an older dog, and so our puppeteer would maybe wear a camisole sweater, some pearls, something to make her look like she is an older dog. We have Zoe, who is a cat who considers herself a little better than everyone else. You have different choices for Zoe. She could be a Siamese, a very aloof kind of a cat. And she can either have a lot of bling and be very fancy, or she could simply be really cool kind of cat and dressed in something that would be considered really fashionable and hip. We actually presented Zoe on a silver platter. She was full of bling, very fancy, and when she entered, she was on a platter. And Sparky is a puppy, and our Sparky made his puppet brown with white spots. So he wore brown clothes with white spots, brown shorts, brown t-shirt, and his puppet happened to have slinkies for legs. Sparky is very bouncy and energetic, and this was a great choice for his puppet. And whenever Sparky moved, he moved quickly. We kept a small trampoline on the stage for those scenes where Sparky appeared without his puppet. We had Hello Mitzi, who is very feminine, dressed in pink. Ours wore a tutu and a very large pink bow and was patterned after a very popular cat, as you can imagine. And she is very, as I said, feminine and concerned about her looks. And we had Carl the chameleon. We chose Carl to be a chameleon because we wanted to have him dressed in fabric that changes under the lights like a chameleon might, something very shiny and sort of when it shimmers looks like different colors. He wore a full suit and a fedora because he's very stylish. We also had Sunshine, the cockatoo, who dressed all in white, like a white cockatoo, and with a flowy blouse and white pants. And the cockatoo itself was all white, actually made from a vacuum cleaner bag, and had feathery wings, feathers attached to cardboard for wings. All of these animals were made from recycled materials, balls of paper with tape around them, nothing really fancy. You can use any kind of recycled materials, normal craft supplies. The puppets don't actually have to move like a real puppet does. Some of our puppets, in order to come onto the stage, needed to look like they were walking. So they were suspended like a marionette from a crossbar. And that way you can also get those that appearance that they are moving, that their feet are moving. But because those puppets don't actually sing or speak, whether the mouth moves or not is really not that critical. It is important that the puppets be big enough for the audience to see, so they should probably be a little larger than a typical pet of that type. Just be sure that they can be seen. So we highly recommend using puppets. It does take time to make them. If you have your students make puppets, it will take extra time. They will need help. They'll need help with a hot glue gun and just knowing how to create a puppet. We had help from an associate professor at Point Park University named D.T. Burns. And you'll see on our resources site a video from DT to help give you some ideas for how to get started as well. You don't have to be an expert in puppetry. You can actually also, to cut down on some of the time, use stuffed animals and redo those so that they can be carried and manipulated by the students. And that could save you some time as well. Making the puppets is very creative and fun, and I highly recommend it if you have time. If you don't, then there are ways to still make this show happen. If you don't use puppets, the show can still be done, particularly with younger students, I think, who might have difficulty with the puppetry aspect of it. However, you do have to consider that at one point in the show where Max and Pumpkin become therapy pets, they are held by two human characters, two patients in a hospital, and they are petted like a pet, a therapy pet would be. So that could be kind of awkward. You would have to think about how you would want to stage that so it's not an awkward kind of interaction. But again, if you can afford the time, we would suggest that you use puppets. The sets that you will need for this show are a front desk for where potential adopted families would appear at the animal shelter. The front desk could have a sign that says "Woe is me Animal Shelter" on it, or somewhere in that area. The animal shelter room, which has two large cages, we put one animal in, or two animals in each one of behind the bars in each one of those cages, and also a ladder for Carl to climb up on, Carl the chameleon, and a perch that was simply a stand tall enough for Sunshine the cockatoo to rest her arm with her puppet on. We had in the shelter room also the cages that are really just bars for your animals to stand behind, because you have a puppet and a puppeteer. You can't exactly put an animal in a cage. You have a puppeteer attached to your puppet. And so you simply need something that looks like they are cages. Also, there is a scene at the Woe Is Me Township Park, which could be something very simple with either a backdrop of trees or even some things like undecorated Christmas trees, artificial Christmas trees, or something to look like you are outside. They are technically performing in a pavilion. If you have something that has a roof on it or can suspend a roof over top of them, that's great, but it doesn't have to be anything really fancy. The scene at Jesse's house doesn't need to be any more than a comfy chair, a large comfy chair, and a dog bed. The hospital scene doesn't need to be anything in particular other than two characters in wheelchairs. The simpler, the better. It keeps the focus on the story and on the characters. And there are scenes where Jesse, the narrator, speaks to the audience, and it really doesn't matter what is in that scene as far as a set. As long as Jesse is standing addressing the audience downstage, that is really all that's required. One of the scenes that's really fun is the Woofstock scene, which takes place in the Woe Is Me Township Park. And we stood our 3 shelter workers on those wooden cubes that I mentioned and gave them some instruments to pretend to play. And it's Pause, Peace, and Love is the song that they perform or pretend to perform, and which is really fun. And then downstage, closer to the audience, we had Sandy, the shelter worker, with each of the puppets and their puppeteers that she was trying to find adopted homes for. And so this is a colorful scene. The shelter workers should wear tie-dyed shirts. You can have your cast who come in to listen to the Woofstock performance also dressed in tie-dyed shirts. And so if you have time to make tie-dyed shirts, that's another fun activity to do. It's important to know that you have to, in this show, in the first 4 scenes, you have to change quickly from the scene where the animals or the puppeteers with their puppets are behind bars to scenes where the puppeteers appear by themselves without puppets in front of the bars, which represents them inside their cages. Max, the dog, is the only animal that runs free and roams free, but you don't want Max to appear behind bars at that point either, because Max has an important part in the show, has a lot of dialogue and solos to sing. Max might want to be just off to one side possibly. So the scene change has to be pretty quick from inside to outside the cages. You could have the puppeteers simply step forward in front of the cages for those scenes where there are no humans but only the animals speaking amongst themselves. You could, if your cages, ours were actually carts, about 18 inches wide, 6 feet high, with bars on the front. They were on wheels. You could flip those around behind the animals if you wanted, so that it's clear that we're now on the other side of those bars with the animals. You could simply move the bars off the stage and have a backdrop that has bars. If you want the perspective to be right, you could have those bars be wider, but it's not absolutely necessary. We tried flipping our cages around so that it looked like the animals, the bars were going behind the animals, and so there was no barrier between the audience and the animals. The problem was our cages were not very wide, and so it made them somewhat unstable. So we chose to simply let the kids take their puppets off stage and come in front of the bars. It is important to make sure that the audience does not ever see a puppet which is unattached to a puppeteer. A puppet is always something that is represented as being alive. So your puppet has to be out of the line of sight of the audience when they're not being used. But then the puppeteers would simply stand or move in front of the bars. We had them sitting on cubes that were 18 by 18-inch wooden cubes. We use those for everything. They have handholds in them, so they're easy to pick up and set down. Some of them have lids on them that we can store props in when needed. So I highly recommend wooden cubes for seating for the animals in that scene, other than Carl the chameleon and Sunshine the cockatoo, who are always just out in front on their ladder, on their perch. There are directions for making carts in our resources for the Sugar Cube at the Sugar Cube show. These were the carts that we used, and just simply put bars across the front of them, tall bars to represent cages. You could try that if you wanted, but this is really a chance for you to be creative and figure out what works for you on your stage with your kids. In the animal scenes, animal shelter scenes where the puppets and their puppeteers were behind bars, we also had dog food dishes and bags of food and animal toys on shelves behind the cages. It's important to have a shelf that is child height for the puppeteers to rest their arms on when they're holding their puppets in those cages. So we also had a shelf along the bottom to put other stuffed animals that could sit there for color. We hung birds along the top, as though there were birds in the top level of the cage. So there were different levels of the cages behind those bars. Those are the primary sets that we used, and other than making those cages, the rest of the set is pretty simple. The countertop for the entrance to the animal shelter where the customers were greeted was always to the side of the stage and down front until the Woe Is Me shelter, the Woe Is Me Township Park scene. And then we moved that cart off of the stage. It wasn't needed any longer. The show has 7 fun songs, and there are tracks for all of the songs. The only song that doesn't really have a track is an a cappella song that most people would recognize because it's meant to be a military march, which one of the shelter workers sings, which is simply that da dun da da dun dun dun, and an echo da dun da da dun dun dun, da 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 dun da dun da 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 dum. There's no track for that. The students simply sing that melody, and they seem very familiar with that. There is music for the chase scene, and that chase scene can be as long or as short as you want it to be. There's a more specific description of how this works when Pumpkin escapes the cage in the director's guide, but I will tell you, to make it appear that Pumpkin is moving so fast that the shelter workers can't catch him, we had several tails that simply were attached to long dowel rods and were manipulated by people off to the side in the wings or behind cages where they couldn't be seen, and they would simply make that tail appear and disappear, appear, disappear. And when that tail would appear somewhere on the stage, the shelter workers would chase it, and then it would appear somewhere else, like Pumpkin had simply raced to the other side of the stage. So that was how we did the chase scene, and it can last as long as you want it to. The chase music is a little over a minute long. There are 4 songs that you could add choreography to. The first song, So You Want to Get a Pet. The song Someone Needs Me does not necessarily have choreography to it. It's just a nice song for the full cast. Pause, Peace, and Love takes place at the Woe Is Me Township Park, and it is a tribute to Woodstock called Woofstock. And the shelter workers and the people who appear in the park to listen to the shelter workers put on this concert could all wear tie-dyed shirts. That's a great all company number. The song You Can't Teach an Old Dog New Tricks is only for Pumpkin and Max, but it's a good opportunity to do a tiny bit of tap dancing and twirling a baton and singing scat. And so you can add some interesting choreography to that, but only for those two characters. And then the final song in the show, called Tailspin, is a full company number. We used ribbon wands that we choreographed a dance with. And I would use professional dance ribbons that really twirl well. And the motions go well with that song to make big circles. It's very colorful. It's a really nice ending to the show, and the kids enjoy using those. So those are the songs that it would be wise to choreograph, but it doesn't have to be anything fancy or that really takes a lot of dance experience. Of course, you can add that if you would like, but you don't have to. So those are some basic suggestions for performing this show. If you have purchased the show and you need more detailed instructions, again, make sure that you look at the director's guide and find more information about costuming your human characters in the show, and look for more specific suggestions. If you have any particular questions about the show itself, please email us at musicals4change. 4 is spelled out F-O-R, musicals4change@gmail.com, and we're happy to give you any kind of assistance that you might need. Best wishes for a wonderful production, and we hope that your kids have a fun, memorable, exciting experience. Thank you. You're in a tailspin.